Time. I'm Heather Nauert. Have a great day. Here's John Scott.
President Obama announcing retribution against Russia for interfering in our election. Ahead, the penalties against the Putin regime, including all the people the White House is kicking out of the country. Also, why President-elect Donald Trump says, let's just move on. Plus, proof that this year was especially deadly for America's police officers. Coming up, a look at some of the heroes who gave their lives in the line of duty. And the actress Debbie Reynolds dying one day after her daughter, Carrie Fisher. Ahead, a family's unbearable Christmas-time tragedy and what Debbie Reynolds told her son just before she died. That and much more to come on a very busy news day. We begin with a Fox urgent, the White House announcing its retaliation against Russia for meddling in our elections. I'm John Scott, in for Shep today. In the last hour, the White House says President Obama has ordered a number of actions in response to what the president calls aggressive harassment of U.S. officials and cyber operations aimed at the U.S. election. That includes the State Department kicking out 35 Russian diplomats from the U.S. and closing Russian-owned compounds in New York and Maryland. The diplomats have 72 hours to leave the country, and the compounds will be closed as of noon tomorrow. More on the moves in a moment. Of course, this comes after all 17 American intelligence agencies concluded that the Kremlin orchestrated the hacking to interfere with our election. And even though President Obama has stopped short of saying the Russian president knew about them, last week he said not much happens in Russia without Vladimir Putin. We have Team Fox coverage. Peter Ducey is in Palm Beach, Florida, where President-elect Trump is spending the holidays. First, though, let's go to Kevin Corke covering President Obama in Honolulu. So tell us more about this response, Kevin.
Well, John, you're right on the money. Great run-up to this story, and I think people at home really have to sort of step back for just a second and sort of take it all in. Great job by you. Effectively, what we're talking about here is 72 hours for nearly 36 Russian diplomats to hit the road to get out of the USA. That's part and parcel to what the White House has been hinting at over the last several days in retaliation to Russian interference in the run-up to the U.S. election. And so that news has come down today, to say nothing of the fact, as you heard Rich Edson report earlier today, this is also a response to high-level and consistent harassment by U.S. Officials abroad in Russia. Our diplomatic corps over there has been subject to a number of devastating attacks and harassment, and so this is also a response to that. Let me share with the folks at home part of the president's statement in reaction again to the Russian hacking and this disclosure this afternoon that a great many of their officials will be hitting the road from the U.S. The president saying in a statement, these data theft and disclosure activities could only have been directed by the highest levels of the Russian government. Moreover, our diplomats have experienced an unacceptable level of harassment in Moscow by Russian security services and police over the last year. Such activities have consequences. Today, I've ordered a number of actions in response, and he goes on to say these actions are not the sum total of our response to Russia's aggressive activities. We will continue to take a variety of actions at a time and place of our choosing, some of which will not be publicized. And I mentioned that last part there, John, because it's also important to know retaliation in the way of sanctions or expelling diplomats, that's something you and I can actually put our hands on. What we won't see or can't touch perhaps is what will happen in cyberspace. This was a cyber act, and it's been said to me by a number of senior U.S. officials that Vladimir Putin was responsible for this hack, and so the U.S. will respond in kind in a cyber manner that we probably won't hear a lot about. John?
All right, Kevin Corke in Hawaii with the president. Kevin, thank you. Team Fox coverage continues with Peter Ducey. He's live in Palm Beach, Florida. Peter, President-elect Trump has been skeptical about Russian meddling. Any chance that that changes now?
There is a chance that it changes now, John, because this morning on a conference call, transition officials told reporters that if somebody had evidence, direct evidence that linked Moscow to interference in the U.S. election, then they should put it public. Then they should let it be public. But that until then, the president-elect was going to be skeptical. So, of course, now that the evidence has been made public, we do wait to hear if the president has indeed changed his mind. But last night, during a party at Mar-a-Lago, the president-elect popped out to talk to reporters, and he said he doesn't really understand why people are still talking about this hacking.
I think we ought to get on with our lives. I think that computers have complicated lives very greatly. The whole, age of computer has made it where nobody knows exactly what's going on. We have speed, we have a lot of other things, but I'm not sure you have the kind of security that you need.
Mr. Trump last night was also asked what he thinks about Senator Lindsey Graham's pitch to put sanctions personally against Russian President Vladimir Putin. Mr. Trump said he doesn't know what Graham is doing. He hasn't talked to Graham yet, but he did get a dig in, and he reminded reporters that Graham ran against him during the primaries. John.
So anything from Trump transition officials and what they're saying about the Russian hacking?
The last update that we got from transition officials was before this White House announcement of punishment. But they said this morning that anytime anybody is talking about Russian hacking, they think it's just because people on the left and Democrats are trying to delegitimize the result of the November election, the result, of course, being a Trump victory. The last time that Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin communicated that we know of was with a Putin letter and then a public Trump response where the two expressed optimism to each other that Russia and the United States can work together more closely come January. That is something else that we have to wait now to see if it changes. John.
Peter Ducey. Peter, thank you. Let's bring in our panel now. Julie Roginski is a Democratic strategist and a Fox News contributor. Boyd Matheson, a Republican strategist, and the former chief of staff to the Republican senator from Utah, Mike Lee. Boyd, I want to start with you. The U.S. response, 9 individuals or organizations sanctioned, 4 of them individual officers of one of the Russian intelligence agencies, along with 3 companies that apparently do business with Russia. How would you assess the overall severity of this move by the White House?
Well, I think it's very serious in diplomatic circles. This is basically one step below kicking out the ambassador to the country. So it's very serious in those terms. The fact that these folks have 72 hours to leave the country is a pretty significant signal to the Russians from the Obama administration, although it's a very odd coming from the Obama administration. They've been really all over the map with Russia, starting with a very pompous Secretary Kerry talking about the reset and a lecture back several years ago. So they seem to be very inconsistent. The timing is very interesting, but the severity in terms of the political circles is definitely real.
Yeah, there are 35 Russian intelligence operatives getting kicked out of the U.S. No doubt they have diplomatic cover for what they do, but we call them intelligence operatives. Julie, what about that? What about the whole Russian reset thing and the hot mic moment where President Obama said he was going to have more flexibility after his re-election, which ultimately did take place? Why are things so poisonous with the Russians right now?
Well, there's one common denominator, right? George Bush came in, said he looked into Vladimir Putin's soul and saw a good person there. Barack Obama, it was actually Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State, that wanted to do the reset. Now we have President-elect Trump praising Vladimir Putin. The common denominator is this. They will always be let down by Vladimir Putin because Vladimir Putin is an authoritarian despot who longs for the days of the Soviet Union's greatness and considers the West to be the perfect foil for convincing his own people who are struggling economically and living in an increasingly repressive regime that all their problems stem not from his policies but from the West. And so the West will always be the red flag for the Russians to use against their own people, or at least for Vladimir Putin. I will say this about the sanctions. They are, and I don't even call them sanctions, I don't know what this is, I call it a disgraceful and weak move by the Obama administration. Lindsey Graham is absolutely right. What Congress needs to do, I don't have any confidence that President-elect Trump would sign this into law, but I would hope that President Obama would have done this. He failed to do that, which is go after Vladimir Putin and his inner circle economically. That is the only language Vladimir Putin understands. He only understands if you go after the billions of dollars in assets that he has shielded in the West and around the world. The oligarchs that prop him up and surround him have assets all over Western Europe and in the United States, including real estate fortunes and also personal fortunes in equity markets in London and the New York Stock Exchange. Freeze those assets, go after them in the pocketbook. It is the only language Putin understands. Throwing out a bunch of quote-unquote diplomats who are really intelligence agents, that's what we used to do during the Cold War. Each side did that to the other. It doesn't make any difference. They'll send new ones in. punishing the Russian intelligence services by banning them from coming here. Okay, great. What does that do to Vladimir Putin or the oligarchs who are threatening the Russian people and the West with their reprehensible behavior? This is a weak and feckless move by the Obama administration, and I am disgusted with how weak it is.
They also, the White House, put out a statement saying that we will continue to take a variety of actions at a time and place of our choosing, some of which will not be publicized. Boyd, I suppose it's possible there could be some things going on here that we won't hear about or will hear about after the fact. But there are many people who think that Donald Trump would not take as tough a line against the Russians as Barack Obama has. Do you think that this will perhaps change his thinking?
It's really going to put President-elect Trump into a box. It's really an interesting dilemma for him coming into office, and I don't think it's helpful to the interests of the country that suddenly he's going to be faced with, does he remove the sanctions that President Obama just inserted? And if he does that, is he signaling that he is good friends with Vladimir Putin and things are going to be different? Or is he going to be more hardline and show American strength and some of the things that Julie talked about in terms of really defending those interests? And so you have this really interesting quandary where the Obama administration, who even just a few months ago refused to put some travel restrictions on some agents, even as it was advised to them by the FBI and Congress, saying they didn't want to provoke Russia in any way. And now they're putting these kinds of things on as they walk out the door, setting up a really interesting and very difficult scenario for an incoming administration that many people have criticized on the foreign policy front.
Julie, we have less than a minute left, but you know, the White House has said that these actions have been going on for a long time. Why slap these sanctions on with just 3 weeks left in the Obama term?
Well, first of all, if you remember, we did slap something called the Magnitsky Act and a bunch of sanctions on the Russians a long time ago in response to what they were doing in suppression of the press and killing, frankly, journalists that were writing stories that were less than complimentary about Vladimir Putin. It has prevented a lot of the people that I talked about from doing business in the West. We need to up that pressure. That was the right strategy to do. The Obama administration was on the right track, along with Congress and people like John McCain and others who, in a bipartisan manner, were doing the right thing on this. Sadly, anything that Barack Obama does through executive order now could be easily overturned starting on January 20th by the next president. That's why it's so important for Congress to act. I have no confidence or hope or expectation that they can act in the next 10, 20 days. But if there's any way to get this codified into law, and to have these sanctions like the Magnitsky Act expanded that targets specifically not the Russian people, but the oligarchs and Vladimir Putin, that's what needs to be done. Any executive order now, I have no confidence will ever be upheld by a man who's praised Vladimir Putin to the stars and thinks he's a great leader to emulate in many ways.
Julie Roginski and Boyd Matheson, thank you both.
Thank you.
More coverage ahead of the penalties against Vladimir Putin's regime, including Speaker of the House Paul Ryan says it's about time we hit back at Russia. He released a statement on today's sanctions against that country, reading in part, Russia does not share America's interests. In fact, it has consistently sought to undermine them, sowing dangerous instability around the world. While today's action by the administration is overdue, it is an appropriate way to end 8 years of failed policy with Russia. And it serves as a prime example of this administration's ineffective foreign policy that has left America weaker in the eyes of the world. Let's bring in Matt Murray, Deputy Editor-in-Chief for the Wall Street Journal. Donald Trump, with regard to Israel and other issues, has been fond of saying, just wait 3 more weeks, January 20th, this all changes. Does it change with regard to Russia?
It's a really big, interesting, unknown question right now. I think that while the president-elect has had great success bringing his party in his direction on many, many issues, this is still a big fault line issue in the Republican Party. And it's clear that there are going to be people in the Senate and Republicans in Congress who feel very differently about Russia than he has expressed so far. And you have to assume, we don't know what it is, that there's a whole raft of intelligence and other information that's classified that some officials are seeing that we're not.
Well, so he's in a bit of a box when it comes to his own party, really, in dealing with Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, I think he is in a bit of a box. I think that's one of the reasons people might question the timing of this on President Obama's part. I mean, that statement by Speaker Ryan is interesting because he's pushing as hard as he can to be as critical of President Obama as he can be, and framing it through that lens, but still making it clear that he is not a fan and a supporter of Russia. Now, I would love to know whether President Obama and President-elect Trump talked about this in their phone call yesterday and how much President-elect Trump knew ahead of time. His people are continuing to say, of course, we have to make it public. There's still a big report to come out from the administration before they leave office that they say will have a lot more details. But it's a little hard to assess. There's so many unknowns behind the scenes here, except that it's clear many Republicans are not going to cozy up to Russia anytime soon.
Had it not been for the very public embarrassment that Hillary Clinton's campaign suffered in seeing John Podesta's, private emails being thrown out there to the world, do you think that all of this would be such a big issue for the White House?
That's a really good question, and it's really hard to tell. I think that the political implications are real. I mean, of course, there are people on the left who say it was obvious in September and that the administration should have spoken out before the election. They didn't want to do that. It's clear that there was a pretty vigorous and robust debate inside the administration about what the meaning of it was, how important it was, and what to do about it. But it's a great question to ask. I think that historically with this White House as well, it sometimes is that they have to be presented with an overwhelming amount of evidence before they really act. So there may have been more information that's developed even since then that's really proud of them here.
And this White House statement suggests that they're going to be the White House is going to be putting out information to help private companies and others prevent hacks like this in the first place. They're going to sort of lay out the game plan, if you will, that the Russians have been using to break into some of these computer systems up till now.
Yeah.
But you wonder if the horse hasn't already run out of the barn door.
Yeah, I mean, as companies like to say, they often discover that there's been bugs in their systems that they didn't know about for years and years that have already been sitting there. Russia has a superior technology when it comes to hacking. The flip side, I should say, and we don't know, are we going to be able to do something back? I mean, the statement hinted that there were going to be actions that don't get publicized, and is there some action we're going to take against the Russians in any particular way? Another question is going to be, do the Russians ramp up certain activities again in response to this? They already threatened that they would do that. So I think this is really, more than some of the other issues that have come up in these last weeks, this is going to be one that really could escalate and be with us for a while.
You work for the Wall Street Journal. What about other financial lanes, blockages that the U.S. could exercise?
I mean, I think that there could be more they could do on the sanctions level in terms of Russian holdings in the United States, potentially. I'm not sure about what they can do directly to some top officials and how easy it is to get to them. I think there's an opportunity, if the United States wants to do more in concert with Europe. There's concern about Russian involvement in the German election or other activities there. I do think, as one of your earlier panelists said, it's a level below expelling the ambassador, so it's pretty serious. And I think there are some things that they've done that the Russians have shrugged off.
Matt Murray, Wall Street Journal. Matt, thank you.
Thanks, John.
More ahead this hour on the new penalties against Russia. And next, the actress Debbie Reynolds has died just one day after saying goodbye to her daughter, Carrie Fisher. A mother's heartbreak and a family's tragedy. More on that coming up. The legendary actress Debbie Reynolds said she wanted to be reunited with her daughter, Carrie Fisher, just moments before she had an apparent stroke. That's what her son tells TMZ. Reynolds' daughter, the Star Wars actress Carrie Fisher, had died the day before, and TMZ reports Reynolds told her son, "I miss her so much, I want to be with Carrie." Hours later, Reynolds was dead. Now stars and fans around the world are remembering an iconic actress whose career spanned more than 6 decades. Claudia Cowan, live in Los Angeles. What do we know, Claudia, about how she died?
John, no official cause of death has been released. It may have been a stroke, but Debbie Reynolds had struggled with health issues for years, and her family thinks that the stress of losing her daughter was just too much to bear. She was at her son's house in Beverly Hills discussing funeral plans when she was rushed to the hospital, and she died within hours. Todd Fisher says she had talked about building some kind of monument for Carrie that would be big enough for her, too, eventually. But he says no one thought they'd both go at the same time. Just like Carrie, Reynolds rose to fame at the age of 19 when she co-starred with Gene Kelly in Singin' in the Rain. She went on to become a star at MGM as well as on TV and on stage. Her private life was not so successful. Her first husband, Eddie Fisher, left her for Elizabeth Taylor. Her second husband squandered away her fortune, and a third marriage ended in 1996. She had to auction off her impressive collection of Hollywood memorabilia to pay off debts, but she was active well into her 80s. In fact, veteran actress Carol Channing says it seems like yesterday that the two of them were talking about possibly doing a new show together. But now, with heavy hearts, she and so many others are remembering Debbie Reynolds as a kind and talented singer and actress, and one of the last of Hollywood royalty. John.
So what about fans? They're sharing condolences with the family, I understand?
They are, John, that's right. Many are visiting Debbie Reynolds' star out on the Hollywood Boulevard Walk of Fame. They are sending prayers to her son, Todd, as well as to Carrie Fisher's daughter. She is actress Billie Lourd, just 24 years old. She lost her mother and her grandmother just 2 days apart. And among the celebrities sharing their grief online, Deborah Messing. Reynolds played her mother on TV's Will and Grace, and in a tribute on Instagram, Messing wrote, quote, "Carrie left too soon, and now they're together again. My heart is literally broken." Funeral plans for both mother and daughter, John, are still pending. Back to you.
Claudia Callan, thanks. More ahead on Russian diplomats getting the boot from the U.S., why a State Department spokesperson says they need to leave. That's next. This afternoon, after it announced it is kicking out 35 Russian diplomats from the U.S., part of the penalty for Russian interference in America's presidential election. Rich Edson is live at the State Department now. Rich?
Good afternoon, John. And in part because of those hacking allegations, and also the State Department is saying it's kicking out those 35 Russian diplomats because of harassment American diplomats are receiving overseas by Russian authorities. In a statement, a State Department spokesperson says, quote, "The department took these actions as part of a comprehensive response to Russia's interference in the U.S. election and to a pattern of harassment of our diplomats overseas that has increased over the last 4 years, including a significant increase in the last 12 months. Officials charge it's involved arbitrary police stops, physical assault, and the broadcast on state television of the personal information of U.S. diplomats that could put them at risk." Reuters reports a Russian official as saying that these sanctions are counterproductive and will harm a restoration of bilateral ties between the United States and Russia. And one member of the Russian upper house, according to Reuters, responded by saying that this is simply the death throes of political corpses, apparently talking about the end of the Obama administration, John.
And there's more fallout from Secretary Kerry's speech on Israel as well, huh?
There is, John. There has been a strong reaction from Israel, a strong reaction from congressional Republicans, and now even from some congressional Democrats who have criticized this. According to Chuck Schumer, he's the incoming Senate Democratic leader. He says, quote, "While Secretary Kerry mentioned Gaza in his speech, he seems to have forgotten the history of the settlements in Gaza, where the Israeli government forced settlers to withdraw from all settlements, and the Palestinians responded by sending rockets into Israel." A State Department official has now responded to Senator Chuck Schumer's response, saying that stating the uncomfortable facts doesn't embolden extremists. Dangerous steps on the ground by both sides do that. This was all set off a week ago when the U.S. decided not to block a UN Security Council resolution, in part condemning Israel for the expansion of settlements, John.
Rich Edson at the State Department, thank you. President Obama is keeping busy as he wraps up his final weeks in office, and political observers say he and Donald Trump seem to be locked in a bit of a power struggle. Trump has taken issue with the president's comments that he could have beaten the billionaire in an election, and Trump blasted the Obama administration for abstaining from a United Nations Security Council vote condemning Israeli settlements on the West Bank. One Republican strategist told the Washington Examiner the president and Donald Trump appear to be battling for attention. Well, on Twitter yesterday, Donald Trump wrote, "Doing my best to disregard the many inflammatory President O statements and roadblocks. Thought it was going to be a smooth transition. Not." Trump later seemed to backtrack from that tweet when he told reporters last night the transition process is going very smoothly. He also said he and the president had a good talk on the phone yesterday.
He called me. We had a very, very good talk generally about things. He was in Hawaii. And it was a very, very nice call, and I actually thought we covered a lot of territory.
The White House has warned Trump there is one president at a time. Let's bring in Sarah Westwood, White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Sarah, these two seemed to hit it off pretty well at first. Right after Trump was elected, there was that handshake in the Oval Office and a lot of nice words. What happened?
You know, it was an escalating battle of rhetoric and of policy moves. President Obama probably envisioned this lame duck period as a victory lap of sorts. He was preparing for a Hillary Clinton win, and so he might not have been prepared for Donald Trump to be taking over. And so this spate of last-minute foreign policy moves, of environmental rules, of executive orders, these were sort of done in what seems to be a last-minute fashion. He didn't expect to need to tie up the loose ends of his policy agenda this quickly. That being said, it has sort of opened up a public rift between Obama and Trump. They're both battling for symbolic control of the country, and both of them have an argument to make as to why they should be calling the shots. Obama is still technically the president, but the voters have spoken and they want a change in leadership. So to exercise this kind of broad executive power could also be seen as sort of a violation of that trust, given how much sanctity that the Democrats put on this electoral process.
It's a transition period unlike any that I have seen, and I wonder whether social media has something to do with that. I mean, Barack Obama is the first president to use Twitter, and Donald Trump seems to use it even better than the president does. So when Trump says that he doesn't like something about what President Obama is doing, all of a sudden that becomes the headline, and that seems to have really irritated the White House.
Exactly. Social media amplifies these small disagreements between Donald Trump and President Obama, and it creates a news cycle that focuses almost entirely on their disagreements at times. I mean, we spent a long time talking about Trump and Obama sparring over U.S.-Israel policy, and we're likely to see the same sort of thing happen probably today when Trump responds to these Russian sanctions. And what Obama is doing here, particularly with the Israel and Russia situations, as he's sort of boxing Donald Trump in foreign policy-wise. He's creating these sort of situations that Donald Trump will have to undo when he comes into office. Now, Donald Trump faces the choice of whether he wants to rescind Russian sanctions in order to make relations with Russia more friendly, like he says, or leave the sanctions in place and risk messing up that friendly and warmer relationship that he wants to have with Putin in order to team up with Russia to combat the Islamic State. So these are decisions that Obama is setting up for Trump to have to face when he comes into office.
Yeah, it is fascinating to see the difference in the two men when it comes to their handling of the Russia situation. And, you know, if Russia has been hacking into our, elections, trying to change election results or, destabilize confidence in the U.S. election, I mean, that happened under President Barack Obama's watch. Donald Trump has been criticized for being too cozy with or too glowing about Vladimir Putin, but Barack Obama is the president, and he's the one who needs to handle these issues.
And that's part of why this is so fascinating, this Russian hacking situation. For years now, Republicans have been pushing President Obama to take a more aggressive stance on Russia as Russia has grown emboldened in Ukraine and in Syria, and Obama has resisted that after his reset deteriorated. Now that Russian hacking has been raised in connection with the election results, which Republicans like, they have been, some of them, and Donald Trump in particular, a little more reluctant to take a hard stance against Russia because their nominee, now their president-elect, has forcefully advocated for normalizing and stabilizing relations with Russia. So this election has really changed the way both parties are approaching Russia. It's almost done a complete 180.
Sarah Westwood, Washington Examiner. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to take a live look now at the Russian Embassy Country Retreat in Centerville, Maryland. Did you know there was such a thing? It's about 60 miles south of Baltimore. The Associated Press also reporting new details from Russian President Vladimir Putin's spokesman saying Moscow regrets the new U.S. sanctions. This place is to be closed under the thing announced by the White House. Russia is going to consider retaliatory measures. So there's that Russian country retreat in Centerville, Maryland, that is to be closed. There's another one in New York. We'll try and get some pictures of that as well. More than a dozen rebel groups have agreed to the ceasefire deal for all of Syria. That's according to a spokesman for the main moderate opposition group there. Turkish and Russian officials negotiated the deal, set to take effect tonight at midnight local time. The U.S. not involved in the talks. Russian President Vladimir Putin says officials from Turkey and Moscow will work to make sure both the rebels and government forces are sticking to the agreement.
The agreements that have been reached are of course fragile and need special attention and accompaniment for them to be preserved and developed. But nevertheless, it's a notable result of our joint work.
He also said there are plans for future peace talks between Syria's government and the rebels. The civil war in Syria began nearly 6 years ago and has killed about 500,000 people. Greg Palcott is tracking the developments from our London bureau. What more do we know about this deal, Greg?
John, we have been watching this war for many years now, and this might be the first ceasefire that even has the remotest chance of succeeding. As you noted, it was presented today by Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's calling for Syrian government and opposition groups to lay down their weapons in less than 90 minutes' time. Syria has, in fact, announced there will be a nationwide halt to the fighting. This after a major offensive that they waged to retake from the rebels all of the key city of Aleppo. Maybe key to this deal. Also important to the deal, again, as you noted, several of the principal supporters on both sides, including President Tayyip Erdogan's Turkey, which backs the rebels, and Russia and Iran, which backs Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria. They are involved with this as well. Not involved, and this also might be key, John, ISIS and the al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria. They could cause problems. Back to you.
And again, the U.S. was not involved in this deal at all.
Not involved in this deal at all. The administration of Barack Obama, not a part of this. Now, remember, the United States has been very active in backing these moderate rebels, which are a part of this deal. They have also been involved in UN-backed peace talks in Geneva and elsewhere for the past several years. Russia has managed to push U.S. out of the picture for the moment. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, however, said once President-elect Donald Trump gets into office, the United States would be allowed back in. As our viewers will remember, Trump has been pretty supportive of the Russian role in Syria. Also, he has been against Obama backing the rebel. One final note, John, there are reports tonight of an outline of a long-term settlement that'll be hashed out in talks beginning next month. It could divide up Syria to some degree, according to where the rebels are, where the government is. It also might have an end point to the regime of Bashar al-Assad, but that might be several years in the future. And frankly, we've just got to look at what the battlefield looks like 90 minutes into the future. Back to you.
Greg Palcott, thanks. Also from that part of the world, U.S.-backed Iraqi troops pushing deeper into the city of Mosul today after weeks of relative calm in the fight to take back that city from ISIS. Iraqi troops launched attacks on 5 neighborhoods, and U.S. officials say coalition airstrikes knocked out the last bridge linking the east and west parts of the city. Counterterrorism forces report they have retaken about a quarter of Mosul so far, but they say their progress is slowing down as they push deeper into the eastern part of the city. Mosul is the last major ISIS stronghold in Iraq, and it's the second biggest city in that country with more than 1 million people. Iraqi troops have been fighting to retake Mosul for more than 2 months. Iraq's prime minister promised to defeat ISIS there by the end of this year. Now he says it may take another 3 months to get the job done. Coming up, how police officers are gearing up to keep folks safe on New Year's Eve after one of the deadliest years for law enforcement. Bush attacks across America helped make 2016 one of the deadliest years for law enforcement in recent history. 135 officers died on the job, according to a nonprofit which tracks officers killed in the line of duty. Caroline Shively with the news live from Washington. Caroline, how big a spike did we see in these ambush-style killings?
Huge, John. 21 officers have died in ambush shootings this year, a jump of 163%. Altogether, as you mentioned, 135 officers were killed in 2016. That number is up 10%, and it's the most in 5 years. 64 officers have been shot to death this year. That's a 56% jump over last year's count of 41, according to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. Driving up all of those numbers, 5 officers were killed in an ambush in July in Dallas, then 3 more in Baton Rouge just 10 days later. The ambush in Dallas was waged during a peaceful protest against police shootings across the U.S. The shooter was hiding in a second-story parking garage and said he wanted to kill as many white police officers as possible. Dallas and Baton Rouge are 2 of the 8 multiple shootings this year. That is tied with 1971 for the highest year since 1932. Here's a list of the deadliest states for officers in 2016. 17 officers were killed in Texas, 10 in California, 9 in Louisiana, 8 in Georgia, and 6 in Michigan. The average age of these officers was 40, with 13 years of service and 2 kids, John.
And there is a particularly dangerous type of call that police officers have to respond to, Caroline.
Yes, domestic disputes. 14 officers were killed responding to those calls. It's the leading cause of death. The latest 2 were 3 weeks ago in Americus, Georgia. Public safety officer Jody Smith and police officer Nicholas Smar were shot on December 7th. Smar was called to the scene. You can see it in his body cam video. Smith heard the call and joined his best friend. After they were both shot, Officer Smar performed CPR on Smith until he passed out. When backup officers arrived, they found Smar slumped over Smith. He died that day, Smith the next. Smar was supposed to serve as Smith's best man in his wedding in May. John?
What a tragic story. Caroline Shively, thank you. Here in New York City, police on high alert for New Year's Eve celebrations after deadly terror attacks in Europe. They say they're setting up more heavy-duty trucks, like the one you see here, to block any attackers trying to drive into the crowds. That's how terrorists killed dozens of people in attacks in Nice, France this summer and in Berlin, Germany earlier this month. Rick Leventhal live in Times Square. What else are police saying about it, Rick?
Well, John, we're told this year will be stricter than ever, with more officers, more checkpoints, more heavy equipment, and a closer scrutiny of the crowd. But the most noticeable difference will probably be those big sand trucks and sanitation trucks. We're told 65 of them will block avenues and side streets and cross streets surrounding Times Square to create a perimeter that authorities say can't be penetrated by an attacker in a vehicle. There will also be 7,000 uniformed officers on duty protecting Times Square and other venues, along with plainclothes cops, counterterrorism teams, snipers on rooftops, and police helicopters and boats. There will be metal and radiation detectors and explosive detectors and K-9 teams, but the NYPD also seems very interested in stopping anyone from driving into the crowds.
In addition to those heavy vehicles, we'll be employing over 100 blocker vehicles to also protect the celebrants. These are not as heavy. These are department vehicles, but it's double what we've used in the past, and they certainly add another layer of security.
And the NYPD says it's all about adapting to changing threats in the world today, John.
And New York City officials are saying that despite the security concerns, they are expecting even bigger crowds this year?
Yeah, we're being told up to 2 million revelers, not just here in Times Square, but at venues across the city. There's a run in Central Park, and fireworks and concerts also planned here and in Coney Island. But, of course, the biggest celebration will be in Times Square, with up to 3,000 people filling every single one of those pens created by metal barricades that will stretch all the way from 42nd Street to 59th Street, filling Broadway and 7th Avenue. And need I remind people, no public bathrooms. It won't be raining, but the temperature will be in the high 20s, we're told. And even the mayor admits that he's not sure why people would come out here early in the day and spend all day and all night here waiting for a ball to drop.
We expect, as per usual, over 1 million people. I'm not quite sure why 1 million people want to stand in the freezing cold for long, long periods of time, but they do. And we'll be ready for them.
And we will be here starting at 8 o'clock Saturday night, John, so you can stay home on the couch.
I will. I appreciate it. Rick, thank you. Just ahead, a major winter storm is taking aim at the northeastern U.S., bringing heavy snow to interior parts of New England. More than a foot possible in some spots. The forecast next. A Fox weather alert and a major winter storm pounding the Northeast, bringing heavy snow and powerful winds to parts of New England. Chief Meteorologist Rick Reichmuth live in the Fox Weather Center. Rick?
Yeah, big storm across parts of New England, and the tail end of it bringing some really severe weather across parts of the South overnight. That kind of moves on from here. Get ready for some temporarily cooler temperatures across parts of the South. But here you go. Here's a storm. It is moving farther towards the west. Basically, that just pulls less cold air along with it. And that means the coastal areas, Boston, all the way down through Hartford and New York City and Philadelphia, all rain, not snow from this. You have to go into interior sections to get the snow, and especially with some elevation. Once you get into the elevation across some of the Green and White Mountains, that's where we're getting really pounded. Some spots, probably over 2 feet of snow by the time this is said and done. Winter storm warnings in effect everywhere you see this pink, parts of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, western, I should say, Massachusetts. Also notice that down there across the mountains of West Virginia, where we're getting some really good snow from this system as well. This is the future radar. So this is how this is going to play out during the overnight hours. You'll notice the lake effect snow is going to really be falling for about the next day or so, but go in towards early morning. This is midnight, and we have most of the snow now just across Maine and parts of New Hampshire, and it's really pretty much gone, at least most of that energy as far as the snow goes, by the time we get towards, say, midday tomorrow. But then we have this lake effect bands that are really going to set up as well. Now, snowfall totals, additional snowfall, we've already seen some spots, maybe up to about 10 inches or so across areas of Vermont. Now we're going to watch the heaviest of it move in across parts of New Hampshire and Maine throughout the overnight hours tonight and to early tomorrow. Windy conditions are going to set up tonight. What we end up having is kind of two pieces of energy combining here, right there across parts of eastern Maine and in towards the Canadian Maritimes. That's where we're going to get the worst of the winds, and it's going to be very, very strong tonight into tomorrow, sometimes maybe as much as 70 miles an hour or so. So get ready for big winds. As temperatures go the next few days, we're looking really good all the way through the remainder of the year. By the time we get to Monday, John, next batch of cold air comes in across the Pacific Northwest.
And the northeastern skiers will be happy. Rick Reichmuth. Thank you.
You bet.
We'll be right back with a look at when a man from Ireland published his first novel and was on his way to becoming one of the most famous writers of all time, and it happened on this day in history. Fewer Americans applied for unemployment benefits last week, continuing a trend that's lasted nearly 2 years. The Labor Department reports weekly requests for jobless aid fell by 10,000 to a seasonally adjusted 265,000. 95 weeks in a row that the number has stayed below 300,000, the longest streak since 1970. Over the past year, the total number of people collecting benefits has fallen almost 5% to around 2 million. Experts say it's an overall positive sign for the economy. Last month, the unemployment rate fell to 4.6%. That is a 9-year low. Well, what's better than one baby panda taking its first steps? 2 of them doing that. These are twins, Yaloon and Shiloon, at the Zoo Atlanta. They are giant pandas, although right now they're not very big, but now that they can get around on their own, they can join their mom in a part of the exhibit where visitors can see them. She had them back in September. On this day in 1916, James Joyce published his first novel here in New York. He grew up in a poor family in Dublin, Ireland, and originally studied medicine to help support his writing career. His first book, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, helped make Joyce famous. He became known for his controversial work. The United States banned his novel Ulysses for years over claims it was too obscene for Americans to read. Critics have called both Portrait of the Artist and Ulysses 2 of the best books of all time, after James Joyce's first novel hit the bookstores 100 years ago today. I'm John Scott in for Shepard Smith. Your World is next. Trish Regan in for Neil Cavuto. Have a great night.